Okay, I guess it makes it a little bit hard to read, but The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I'm on one of the last parts, just entering into part 6, so you can join me. The whole town came to the wedding. Aliena was surprised. Most people treated her and Jack as more or less married already, and she had thought they would consider the wedding a mere formality. She had expected a small group of friends, mostly people of her own age and Jack's fellow master craftsmen. But every man and woman and child in Kingsbridge turned out. She was touched by their presence, and they all looked so happy for her. She realized that they had sympathized with their predicament, and all these years, even though they had tactfully remained from mentioning it to her. And now they shared her joy in finally marrying the man she had loved for so long. She walked through the streets in her brother Richard's arm, dazzled by the smiles that followed her, drunk with happiness. Richard was leaving for the Holy Land tomorrow. King Stephen had accepted this solution. Indeed, he seemed revealed to be rid of Richard so easily. Or relieved. Sheriff William was furious, of course, for his aim had been to dispossess Richard of the earldom, and now he had lost all chance of doing that. Richard himself still had that faraway look in his eyes. He could hardly wait to be gone. This was not the way her father had intended things to turn out, she thought, as she entered the priory close. Richard fighting in a distant land, and Aliena herself playing the role of earl. However, she no longer felt obliged to run her life according to her father's wishes. He had been dead for 17 years, and anyway, she knew something that he had not understood. That she would be far better earl than Richard. She had already taken the reins of power. The castle servants were lazy after years of slack management, and she had smartened them up. She had reorganized the stores, had the great hall painted, and cleaned out the bakehouse and the brewery. The kitchen had been so filthy that she had burned it down to build a new one. She had started to pay out the weekly wages herself as a sign that she was in charge, and she had dismissed 3 men-at-arms for persistent drunkenness. She had also ordered a new castle to be built in an hour's ride from Kingsbridge. Earl's Castle was too far from the cathedral. Jack had drawn a design for the new place. They would move in as soon as the keep was built. Meanwhile, they would split their time between Earl's Castle and Kingsbridge. They had already spent several nights together in Aliena's old room at Earl's Castle, far from Philip's disapproving gaze. They had been like honeymooners, swamped by insatiable physical passion. Perhaps it was because for the first time ever they had a bedroom with a door they could lock. Privacy was an extravagance of lords. Everyone else slept and made love downstairs in the communal hall. Even couples who lived in a house were always liable to be seen by their children, or relatives, or neighbors dropping by. People locked their doors when they were out, not when they were in. Aliena had never been dissatisfied with that, but now she had discovered the special thrill of knowing you could do anything you liked without the risk of being seen. She thought of some of the things that she and Jack had done in the past 2 weeks, and she blushed. Jack was waiting for her in the partly built nave of the cathedral, with Martha and Tommy and Sally. At weddings, the couple normally exchanged vows in the church porch, then went inside for Mass. Today, the first bay of the nave would serve as a porch. Aliena was glad that they were getting married in a church Jack was building. It was as much a part of Jack as the clothes he wore or the way he made love. His cathedral was going to be like him, graceful, inventive, cheerful, and totally unlike anything that had gone before. She looked lovingly at him. He was 30 years old. He was such a handsome man, with his mane of red hair and his sparkling blue eyes. He had been very ugly as a boy, she remembered. She had thought of him somewhat beneath her notice. But he had fallen in love with her at the very start, he said, and he still winced when he remembered how they all laughed at him because he said he had never had a father. And it was nearly 20 years ago. 20 years. She might have never seen Jack again had it not been for Prior Philip, who now entered the church from the cloisters and came smiling into the nave. He looked genuinely thrilled to be marrying them at last. She thought of her first meeting with him. She recalled vividly the despair she had felt when the wool merchant tried to cheat her, after all the effort and heartbreak that had gone into amassing that sack of fleeces, and her overwhelming gratitude to the young black-haired monk who had saved her and said, "I'll buy your wool any time." His hair was grey now. He had saved her, then, and he had almost destroyed her by forcing Jack to choose between her and the cathedral. He was a hard man on questions of right and wrong, a bit like her father. However, he had wanted to perform the marriage service. Ellen had cursed Aliena's first wedding, and the curse had worked. Aliena was glad. If her marriage to Alfred had not been completely insupportable, she might be living with him still. It was odd to reflect on what might have been. It gave her chills, like bad dreams and dreadful imaginings. She recalled the pretty, sexy Arab girl in Toledo who had fallen in love with Jack. What if he had married her? Aliena would have arrived in Toledo with her baby in her arms to find Jack in the lap of domesticity. Sharing his body and his mind with someone else. The thought was horrifying. She listened to him mumbling the Paternoster. It seemed amazing now to think that when she came to live in Kingsbridge, she had paid no attention to him than the grain merchant's cat. But he had noticed her. He had loved her secretly all those years. How patient he had been. He had watched as the younger sons of the county gentry came to court her one by one and went away disappointed or offended or defiant. He had seen clever boy that he was, that she could not be won by wooing, and he approached her sidelong as a friend rather than a lover, meeting her in the woods and telling her stories and making her love him without her noticing. She remembered that first kiss, so light and casual, except that it had burned her lips for weeks afterward. She remembered the second kiss even more vividly. Every time she heard the rumble of the filling mill, she remembered the dark, unfamiliar, unwelcome surge of lust that she had felt. One of the abiding regrets of her life was the way that she had turned cold after that. Jack had loved her totally and honestly, and she had been so frightened she had turned away, pretending she did not care for him. It had hurt him deeply, and although he continued to love her, and the wound had healed, it left a scar, as deep wounds do, and sometimes she saw that scar in the way he looked at her when they quarreled and she spoke coldly to him, and his eyes seemed to say, "Yes, I know you. You can be cold. You can hurt me. I must be on my guard." There was a wary look in his eyes now, as he vowed to be loving and faithful to her for the rest of his life. He's got reason to doubt me, I thought. I married Alfred, and what greater betrayal could there be than that? But then I made up for it by searching half of Christendom to find Jack. Such disappointments and reconciliations, the stuff of married life. But she and Jack had gone through them before the wedding. Now, at least, she felt confident that she knew him. Nothing was likely to surprise her. It was a funny way to do things, but it might be better than making your vows first and getting to know your spouse afterward. The priests would not agree. Of course, indeed, Philip would be apologetic if he knew what was going through her mind. But then again, priests knew less about love than anyone. She made her vows, repeating the words after Philip, thinking to herself how beautiful was the promise. With my body, I worship you. Philip would never understand that. Jack put a ring on her finger. I'd been waiting for this all my life, she thought. She looked into his eyes. Something had changed in him. She could tell. She realized that until this moment he had never really been sure of her. Now he looked deeply content. "I love you," he said. I always will. That was his vow. The rest was religion. And now he had made his own promise, and Aliena realized that she too had been unsure of him until now. In a moment, they would walk forward into the crossing for the Mass, and after that they would accept the congratulations and good wishes of the townspeople, and take them home and give them food and ale and make merry. But this small instance was just for them. Jack and his look said, "You and me together always." And Aliena thought, at last. It was very peaceful. See? We have a picture. You can see that. Excellent.